risk of Porzingis not being the same guy or being on load management and not playing as many games as we think. So, I mean, I think it's a very risky team to bet on either way, but I would probably stay away, but I'm going to choose the under, gun to my head. Uh, who's next in the division, Jason?
I'm very excited because I just got back from Ocean City, Maryland, celebrating my mom's birthday. She's not going to listen to this, but happy birthday, Mom.
Happy birthday, Ma.
Oh, thanks, Ben. Hey, Ma, Ben wished you happy birthday. Okay. It's funny if she responds. I think she went to sleep. But
that
anyway,
was a real peek behind the curtain for the folks who are listening in here. I love it.
Yes, it was a real big peek behind the curtain. But my next trip planned, aside from hopefully seeing you, of course, pals, I'm going to New Orleans in December. So I am very high on this Pelicans team. We've been talking about it since July. I am stoked, absolutely stoked to see this team on the court. They have rebuilt faster than a lot of other teams are capable of doing. I mean, they got lucky, lightning struck, getting the number 1 pick in the draft and getting Zion Williamson to replace Anthony Davis, whom they traded for a coup of players and draft picks led by Lonzo Ball, Brandon Ingram. You still have a borderline all-star point guard there in Drew Holiday, signing 2 of the better veteran free agents on the market that are real good glue guys in J.J. Redick and Derek Favors. They have the Reclamation Project with Jahlil Okafor. They drafted another young center in Jackson Hayes, who I know you don't really like too much, but this team's got some exciting young pieces. And similar to the Spurs, Ben, not a lot of people are talking about them. I mean, they're going to get some primetime games because of Zion Williamson. And I know there's a little bit of hesitation because they don't know how his game will translate to the NBA level. But this team has a chance to be the surprising team, not just in the West, but in the league this year. I think the young players that came from the Lakers are going to be extremely motivated. They were all given up on by the team that drafted them, in a win-now move, getting Anthony Davis to play alongside LeBron. This mix of players, I think, fits so nicely together that it's really hard to say anything bad about this team. Are they going to win the championship? No. But they're going to be real fun to watch, and I think they're going to be super competitive.
Let's dance, Jason, as the great Zion Williamson said. Yeah, you said it. I mean, this is a team, first and foremost, that is going to do 2 things, I think, pretty well. One of which I think might surprise people. The first is they're going to get out and run, Jason, and they are going to be fun to watch because they're going to be throwing some alley-oops. You have Lonzo Ball, who is a willing and able passer, Drew Holiday. There's a chance those two play together some. You get Redick out there. They're going to be able to space the floor a little bit. When Holiday and Redick are both out there, they're going to have a little bit better spacing. And then, obviously, Zion Williamson only needs a little bit of space to cram things down on people. So that's going to be fun. I think the other piece is, and this could contribute, I think that they're going to be a sneakily good defensive team, Jason. And I think people might be sleeping on how good defensively this team might end up being. And I say that because they are impossibly long at every position. I mean, you have an all-NBA level defender in Drew Holiday, solid team defender in J.J. Redick, a little underrated on that end. Brandon Ingram, very long. Zion Williamson, one of the better defensive players in all of college basketball a year ago. Derek Favors, one of the better defensive big men in the whole league. Lonzo Ball, criminally underrated, by the way, is really good. Josh Hart came over. He's solid. I mean, the only guys you're really worried about are your guys like Jackson Hayes and Jahlil Okafor, and they really might not play a whole heck of a lot, Jason. I mean, when you really look at this team, those guys are going to be kind of role players at best. With the number of guys they have a a lot of depth. You have guys like Etuan Moore who are probably going to slot in, and that means some of the rookies like Nickeil Alexander-Walker, Nicole O'Malley, Jackson Hayes, those guys might not play much. Jahlil Okafor might not play at all almost. And that means I think that this team is going to be really solid defensively. And if that means they get out and run, I agree with you, Jason. This team could be a major, major surprise. But I think the big question beyond obviously how Zion Williamson adapts to the NBA is how these new additions will play, Jason. I mean, and that's Lonzo, that's Ingram, that's Josh Hart, J.J. Redick, Derek Favors. I mean, how do you think those guys are going to mesh on this kind of young team otherwise?
Well, I do think this team is incredibly deep. All the guys we've talked about so far at length. But I'm not going to sit here and be a homer. I'm not a Pelicans fan. I do think there will be a bit of an adjustment period for Zion. I mean, they were very cautious with him in Summer League, didn't play too much. I want to see him play as close to 82 games as possible. He's a big dude, super athletic, but it's going to be pretty interesting to see how his game translates from Duke to the NBA. That said, there's depth there because you have Okafor and Favors who can play. Favors is still an NBA starter, so I think you'll see Zion and Derek Favors start together in the front court. But there are plenty of pieces to back them up if Zion needs, a benching in the fourth quarter, experiencing some growing pains. They have the depth that they'll be prepared for that. But there's also a lot of hype surrounding Zion. He's probably the most sought-after number one pick since Anthony Davis 7 years ago. I mean, we talked about this right after the draft. He's going to have so many eyes on him. There's going to be expectations there. And I'm one of the people sitting here feeding into that because I do have high expectations for the Pelicans. But still, buyers beware because you have to see Zion on an NBA court staying healthy and contributing first. But if it doesn't pan out, at least not right away, they're ready for that.
Yeah, and I think that really plays into where we're going, which is our ceiling and floor of this team. Because to me, the ceiling, and for this team, I'm going to kind of do both because I think they go together so much. But I think the ceiling is a playoff team, but the floor is much lower because of all the young players. And so I could see them being bottom 5 in the conference simply because if it doesn't start out well, this isn't a team that's going to just try to hang around. This is a team that might consider trading a Drew Holiday. They might consider trading some of the pieces. If they realize they're not going to be any good this year, I wouldn't be shocked if they decide to start a little bit more of a youth movement. So I think the ceiling is definitely the playoffs, but I could see the floor being a lot lower than people might think at the moment just because I don't think that they have any real motivation to win now. They'll be happy, and David Griffin will be more than happy to build slowly. He spoke about how frustrating it was to be in Cleveland and feel like everything you build has to get thrown away for a single year of contention. And you can bet, Jason, he is not going to do the same thing here. He's going to take his time, and he's going to try and build around his young players. And so for me, this is a team that is really going to be fun to watch for the first 20 games because if they start off, 12-8, 14-6, 15-5, they could be off and running and they could really make some noise in the Western Conference. But if they start out 5-15 and they struggle out of the gate, you might see David Griffin start eyeing some pieces and decide to kind of lean into not a rebuild, but a retool around his young guys.
See, to your point, I don't think it's going to be a slow rebuild. It's an accelerated rebuild, but not the length of championship or bust. You do not sign JJ Redick and trade for Derek Favors if you're not trying to win now. Both of those guys are on the back end of their primes, especially Redick. He's coming up on the end of his career pretty much, or at least being a regular NBA contributor. They're both solid locker room presence. Okay, they both bring that energy, that veteran leadership to the locker room. And Drew Holiday's still there, and he's still kicking. So you don't have those three guys surrounded by Zion and the three kids from L.A., Lonzo, Ingram, and Hart, if they're not trying to win now. I think all these players fit nicely together. I don't really see too glaring a weakness on this team. They have a little bit of everything, and Zion Williamson could be that superstar. So I think that, well, it's not going to be a super fast championship or bust type rebuild, but they're going for it now. You don't sign J.J. Redick if you're not. So I think they are going for it. I'm not saying, like I said, they're not winning the championship, but they're going to be in the conversation for the playoffs. So that's why my ceiling for them is 44 wins and the 8th seed. Because the West is very good, and you can make a case for 9, 10, 11 teams that could be better than them. But at their absolute peak, and this is where the middle-of-the-road rebuild conversation comes into play, Ben, 44 wins, 8th seed.
I hear you. And where do you think their floor ends up? What's the worst case for them?
Well, you said it already. If it doesn't work out and they start 5-15, they might be headed to another year of rebuilding, finishing maybe 12th or 13th seed in the West. But guess what? They have a treasure trove of draft picks
Yep.
coming to them because of the Anthony Davis trade. So they're going to have some draft capital, and if there's a disgruntled superstar that didn't work out, whether they signed last year or this year, they could be in play for some huge trades. And you know what would be super ironic if the Pelicans finish with a better record than the Lakers? Not saying it's going to happen, but that would just be poetic justice for the Pelicans organization.
I think the other thing about this team that I'd really like to see, Jason, and this is the one thing that would stop me from predicting they make the playoffs. I would like to see a little bit more creative of a head coach for this team. And the reason I say that, and file this one away, because I don't think it's going to be this year with Alvin Gentry. But when you look at this team, one of the things that really stands out is the passing. If you look, besides Derek Favors, really their key rotation players are all well above average passers for their position. You look at a guy like Lonzo Ball, very unselfish player. Drew Holiday, very unselfish, very capable of making the extra pass. JJ Redick, great team player, really good at making basic reads. He's known as just a shooter, but when you watch him play, he knows where to kind of shoot the ball over to. If there's an open guy, he finds him. And then Brandon Ingram and Zion Williamson, for guys who can play the 4-5, kind of a small ball 4-5, they are about as good passers as you can find outside of a guy like a Nikola Jokic, rather. I'm getting my former Bulls in here. You think about Ingram and Williamson. If you imagine a starting lineup at points here where Lonzo Ball, Drew Holiday, Redick, Ingram, and Williamson share the floor, you could watch the ball pinging around to the open shooter, pinging around for open layups. And I wonder if Gentry's up to the task, but I think that's going to be a fascinating subplot. And you are going to see some of the best transition basketball in the entire league, and maybe some of the best transition basketball we've seen since the LeBron, Dwayne Wade Heat, I think, on this team, given the spacing that they have. So this is definitely a league pass team, is what I will say to kind of close up our preview before we jump to our over-unders.
So the over-under here, thanks to our friends again at DraftKings, we're going to be using them the entire preseason. No, we're not making any money. We just went eeny, meeny, miny DraftKings, so we're going with those odds. And they set it at 38.5. I'm not going to make the people wait. Over!
Yeah, I'm with you. I'm choosing the over. I think the talent here really just plays it out, and it's hard to imagine them not being at least in that ballpark. But, Jason, we have one last team in this division, and that is the Memphis Grizzlies. Probably the team here that is the consensus last place finisher, given how tough the teams above them are, but also a team that has finally hit the reset button and has done so pretty successfully, I would say. I mean, I'm not sure many teams had a better offseason than the Grizzlies, who managed to turn the pieces they had into a lot of assets, and they held on to a couple on top of it. So you look at what they did. They ended up getting real assets for a guy like Mike Conley. They probably got more than they could have gotten a year ago. They end up with the number 2 pick in the draft. They get Ja Morant. They replace their point guard. They make a great signing, Tyus Jones. I loved that move. They pick up some kind of discarded pieces like Josh Jackson. They pick up Andre Iguodala, get a first-round pick for their trouble. They end up getting Jay Crowder from the Jazz in that deal. I mean, they could ship those guys, end up getting some second-round picks. Who knows what they'll get for Iguodala? Maybe some young players. And, of course, they had Jaren Jackson, who was one of the youngest and most talented rookies a year ago. So, I mean, their rebuild is in a good place, I think, Jason. I mean, I really like what they did, but there's still a lot of room, and I think that they're going to be making some trades with Iguodala and Crowder. As I said, I think Iguodala to Houston is almost a foregone conclusion. And then there's some other nice little pieces here. I mean, are there any young players here outside of the obvious ones in Morant and Jackson that you think could really come on the scene this year and really play well?
I'm going to pinpoint 2. Dylan Brooks, who's shown flashes. You know, he's a keeper there in Memphis. They're trying to see if they can make him a piece of the future. I'm worried that he may have peaked. You know, he doesn't have star potential or anything, but NBA teams have seen what he can do, and now they can game plan against that. So I'm going with Grayson Allen. Didn't work out well in Utah. Didn't really get a fair shake, if you ask me. So I think him on a young Memphis team with plenty of playing time opportunities is definitely a name to look out for. And then Josh